readers, welcome back to another video. My name is Paloma, and today's topic is going to be books I recommend for Black History Month. So the first book that I recommend is Native Son by Richard Wright. I don't know if you can see my shirt, but I actually got it from the American Writers Museum in Chicago. I absolutely love this book. Even though it's such a heavy topic, I think it was so well written, and I think everybody should read this at least once in their life. That's how much I love this book. So right from the start, Bigger Thomas had been headed for jail. It could have been for assault or petty larceny. By chance, it was for murder and rape. Native Son tells the story of this young black man caught in a downward spiral after he kills a young white woman in a brief moment of panic. Set in Chicago in the 1930s, Wright's powerful novel is an unsparing reflection on the poverty and feelings of hopelessness experienced by people in inner cities across the country and of what it means to be Black in America. Just from that description alone, you understand just the gravity of what the book is going to be talking about, and it's so well done. I was so shocked when I read it. Typically when I read books, I don't really read reviews. I don't go on Goodreads or anything like that. I honestly just read them at face value, which was what made this book so surprising to me because I technically had never heard of Richard Wright before, and I consumed this book. I wanted to support Bigger, but I also knew what he had done wrong, and I think that's what made him a great character, especially when you come to terms with what it means to be Black in America. Especially as a Black man living in 1930 Chicago. It's just a really well done book. So the next book I'm going to recommend is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is arguably my personal favorite. Once again, because I don't really read reviews and I typically only read the first page of a book to see if I like it or not, I was wholly surprised at how much I love this book. I'd never really read any of Colson Whitehead's book. I know Underground Railroad was really popular and they had an Amazon TV show made about it, but this was the one that I picked up first, and I'm so glad I did. And honestly, I can't wait to watch the movie because the movie I think is set in a first-person narrative, which I have never really experienced before, and honestly, I think that makes for a better viewing experience, especially when it comes to this book, only because of the twist at the end, which I won't say. When Elwood Curtis, a Black boy growing up in 1960s Tallahassee, is unfairly sentenced to a juvenile reformatory called the Nickel Academy, he finds himself trapped in a grotesque chamber of horrors. Elwood's only salvation is his friendship with a fellow delinquent, Turner, which deepens despite Turner's conviction that Elwood is hopelessly naive, that the world is crooked, and that the only way to survive is to scheme and avoid trouble. As life at the academy becomes ever more perilous, the tension between Elwood's ideas and Turner's skepticism leads to a decision with repercussions that will echo down the decades. Based on the real story of a reform school that operated for 111 years and warped the lives of thousands of children, The Nickel Boys is a devastating driven narrative that showcases a great American novelist writing at the height of his powers. I think this is one of his best novels to date. I don't even know how to describe how I felt reading this. I felt Elwood's naivety at the situation he was going in. I felt his pain. I felt his fear at going to this delinquent school. And it made my stomach turn with every single page at what him and the other students were going through at the Nickel Academy. And deserved. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize? Deserved. So the third book I recommend is The Street by Ann Petry. I loved this book. I loved it from beginning to end. I thought it was a great conversation on what it means to be a single Black mother, trying to make her own way within the world, as well as, trying to still find her dreams and ambitions. I loved it. The Street follows the spirited Ludi Johnson, a newly single mother, whose efforts to claim a share of the American dream for herself and her young son meet frustration at every turn in 1940s Harlem. Opening a fresh perspective on the realities and challenges of Black female working-class life, The Street becomes the first novel by an African-American woman to sell more than 1 million copies. I enjoyed this book so much. There was not a page where I knew what was going to happen, and I thought that made for a better reading experience because I'm like, oh my gosh, Ludi, what is going on here? What are you doing? If I had to give a criticism of the book, I didn't like the ending. I understand what Ann Petry was trying to say and do. I do think it could have went a different direction. Ludi can only reconcile with the consequences of her actions. That's all I can say. Do you see how beat up this book is? This was the book that got me back into reading. That with Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. When I read this during my second year of college, I could not put this book down. And as you can see, I ate it up. This is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, and I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong, because she's mother. She's mother. Ghana, 18th century. Two half-sisters are born into different villages, each unaware of the other. One will marry an Englishman and lead a life of comfort in the palatial rooms of the Cape Coast castle. The other will be captured in a raid on her village, imprisoned in the very same castle, and sold into slavery. Homegoing follows the parallel paths of these sisters and their descendants through 8 generations, from the Gold Coast to the plantations of Mississippi, from the American Civil War to Jazz Age Harlem. Yaa Gyasi's extraordinary novel illuminates slavery's troubled legacy, both for those who were taken and those who stayed, and shows how the memory of captivity has been inscribed on the soul of our nation. It is a tremendous book. It's something different to what I've read before, considering that I read historical fiction. I had never really read a book that had followed at least 8 generations and the consequences of how history has played a part in how we view the world, how we go through the world, and how the world views us. I loved it. As you well can see, I loved it. I recommended it. I gave it to somebody, and they said the same thing. They said that they loved it. This next book, when I tell you I could not put this book down, this is The Vanishing Half by Bennett. It is remarkable. Almost in the same vein as Homegoing, we follow 2 sisters who follow 2 different paths. But the difference with The Vanishing Half is that they're inseparable as children, but they also choose to live in 2 different worlds, one black and one white. The Vine sisters will always be identical, but after growing up together in a small southern black community and running away at age 16, it's not just the shape of their daily lives that is different as adults, it's everything. Their families, their communities, their racial identities. Many years later, one sister lives with her black daughter in the same southern town she once tried to escape. The other secretly passes for white, and her husband knows nothing of her past. Still, although separated by so many miles and just as many lies, the fates of the twins remain intertwined. What will happen to the next generation when their own daughter's storylines intersect? Weaving together multiple strands and generations, The Vanishing Half is at once a riveting family story and a brilliant exploration of the American history of passing. Looking well beyond issues of race, it considers the lasting influence of the past as it shapes a person's decisions, desires, and expectations. This book transported me to a world I had never even considered before. It makes for a compelling idea of what it means to hide your identity and the lengths you'll go just to be like, oh, I'm not this. This is who I am. I shed my past, and the person you see today, despite all that I know and all that I've lived through, is completely gone. And I loved how that echoed through their daughters and the way that their daughters walked through life. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. I love it. And so the final recommendation that I physically have is going to be James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. I technically did not finish this book. I really wish I had. I think at the time I had been reading so much heavy stuff that I needed to put it aside for a little bit. But in 2025, I think I am going to finish this book just because I really want to read it. I remember the few chapters that I read and I was like, oh my god, this is such beautiful, masterful writing. With lyrical precision, psychological directness, resonating symbolic power, and a rage that is at once unrelenting and compassionate, Baldwin chronicles a 14-year-old boy's discovery one Saturday in March 1935 of the terms of his identity as the stepson of the minister of a storefront Pentecostal church in Harlem. Baldwin's rendering of his protagonist's spiritual, sexual, and moral struggle of self-invention opened new possibilities in the American language and in the way Americans understand themselves. I think if you ever read anything, at least once in your life, you have to read a James Baldwin. It's the same vein as in at least once in your life you need to read a Toni Morrison or a Maya Angelou, which I have to get on. I think I'll do that in 2025. I started them, and once again, I put it down just because it was so heavy, and I don't think I was ready for it at the time, but I think now that I'm a little bit older, I think I am ready for it, so I can't wait to get back into this and see, the true writing power that James Baldwin has. So another book that I recommend that I don't physically have, nor have I read it yet, is How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, and it's a reckoning with the history of slavery across America. This will be the first non-fiction book that I've read in a while. One of my goals for 2025 was to read more non-historical books. I think it'll open up a new perspective. I want to try and dive into my love of history beyond the historical fiction and really read, the true things that happened in the past. And I think this is a great place for me to start. Beginning in his hometown of New Orleans, Clint Smith leads the reader on an unforgettable tour of monuments and landmarks, those that are honest about the past and those that are not, that offer an intergenerational story of how slavery has been central in shaping our nation's collective history and ourselves. A deeply researched and transporting exploration of the legacy of slavery and its imprint on centuries of American history. How the Word is Passed illustrates how some of our country's most essential stories are hidden in plain view, whether in places we might drive by on our way to work, holidays such as Juneteenth, or entire neighborhoods like downtown Manhattan, where the brutal history of the trade in enslaved men, women, and children has been deeply imprinted. I'm really excited to read this. I'm just really excited to read it. I can't wait to get it, and I think it'll be a great read. And so the final book I recommend is going to be Zora Neale Hurston's Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick. This is another one like the James Baldwin book I had started and I did not finish. For me, this book, I think the language threw me off because she's kind of writing as though it's colloquial, if I had to say. I don't want to say that it was hard to read, but it was a bit different, and so I had to put it down. But I'm not going to put it down this year. I'm going to read it because I want to read Zora Neale Hurston. So Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick is an outstanding collection of stories that flash with Hurston's biting satiric humor as they share revelations about love and migration, gender and class, racism and sexism that proudly reflect African American folk culture. Brought together for the first time, they include 8 of Hurston's lost Harlem gems, which were found in dusty periodicals and archives. All are timeless classics that enrich our understanding and appreciation of this exceptional writer's voice and her contributions to America's literary traditions. I can't wait to read it. I think I'm at a point in my life where I can look past the language and really just consume it as it is, how she intended. Once again, these are my recommendations for the books to read during Black History Month. If you have any suggestions, please leave them down in the comments and I'll be happy to take a look at them. I'm always in the mood and I'm always eager to read more books recommended by other people. Have a great day and I hope to see you in the next video.